Hi there, and welcome to this workshop. In today's workshop, I'm going to look at two very common learning management systems, Google Classroom and avenue.ca. Avenue, as many of you know, has been around for at least a year and a bit and was formerly known as Learn IT to Teach's Moodle platform. It's undergone some changes. Some things are still the same, but I'm going to go through and compare some of the features and functions of Google Classroom and avenue.ca. So if you have any questions anywhere along the way, certainly feel free to go into chat, put the questions in there, and I will answer the questions as they come up or at the end of the presentation, whatever works. And just a brief introduction, you might know me already, but if you don't, my name is Jen Artan. I have been working as with Learn IT to Teach as a mentor and trainer for a few years now. I've done the training with them back when it was Moodle, and of course the avenue.ca training over the past year. I'm a mentor, and if you ever have any questions, you can certainly get in touch with me at Twitter at Jen Artan. I also work for Thames Valley District School Board here in London, Ontario, as an OCELT CEI, that's continuing education instructor. And over the past year, I've been helping with ed tech, right? Like we all need the help. The other things I'm doing on the list, as you can see, I'm a courseware writer with Achieve, and I've also been working with Hamilton, Ontario as one of their instructors for their online programs. So again, if you need to get in touch with me, you can certainly get in touch with me at avenue.ca in the social forum for teachers or through Twitter. So again, in this workshop today, we're going to look specifically at two major learning management systems, of course, avenue.ca and Google Classroom. Now, I've chosen these two, well, Avenue, obvious, because certainly there are functions and features and affordances and resources within Avenue that I'm really excited to share. And Google as well, because Google has been a really good standby option for many instructors and learners over the past year and a half as kind of an emergency gap fill measure, right? When all else fails, use Google, because we're mostly very, very familiar with it. Many students have Gmail accounts and they know how the platform works. It is a little intuitive. So Google did fill the gaps for many providers. But the good news is, if you're used to using Google, almost everything in Google can be done inside of Avenue. And we'll look at some of those features coming up. So again, looking at the best of Google and the best of Avenue, I will be comparing the two, looking at the features and the functions and the affordances and things like that. So as of today, it's June 23rd, 2021. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details, but it's been a year and a half since the global pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, has made learning at home and remote learning, virtual learning, hybrid learning, whatever you want to call it, a reality for many LINC instructors across the country. So in the past, of course, a couple of years ago, we all would have been thinking, learning online is a nice thing to have, but who's got the time for it? Well, enter March of last year, and we are, right in the middle of it. Many of us now have had that experience and can reflect back on what has worked and what we would like to see improved over the coming years. One of the things that we have learned, and I've been hearing this repeatedly from my students and teachers, is how important it is for there to be a social presence in your online courses. Whether you're completely asynchronous, where your students check in on their own time, or whether you have those synchronous sessions where you have the live classes via Zoom, Big Blue Button, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, whatever platform you're using for your synchronous sessions, having that social presence, we know, has been really, really important, especially for our Canadian LINC learners, many of whom have been even more isolated than the average Canadian for a number of reasons. So providing that social presence, that check-in time where they can check in with each other and create this social atmosphere that we would normally get in a face-to-face classroom, that's an important part of learning. The other thing that we've noticed is technology. A little bit goes a long way. I know some teachers and instructors dove right into this and were, looking at, using all these different kinds of tools inside their Google Classroom and adding many different bells and whistles to their Avenue courseware. There are a lot of things available. There are a lot of functions and features and things you can do, but be selective, right? You do not want to have too much going on your online platform. It's going to be confusing for your students, and you want to keep it as minimal as possible. Find the tool that best fits that learning objective. So if you're looking at using Padlet, for example, as a group forum situation, use it. Padlet's amazing. Padlet is really super simple to use, integrates directly with Google Classroom. You can embed it in Avenue. If you prefer that as opposed to a threaded discussion board, which already exists inside of Avenue, certainly use it, but don't use both, right? So if you're going to do Padlet. And if you're going to do the threaded discussion, do the threaded discussion. When we're trying to add all these different bells and whistles, it can get overloading to the senses for the students, and we don't want to cause confusion. Slow down, reuse material, use the same resources, but in a different way. I think the expression is known as going back to the well. You've got a piece of, a website that you're looking at, for example, the Health Canada site on coronavirus updates might have been something that you went back to more than once over the past year. So that's perfectly good, and it's a really good teaching practice because the students become familiar with the information and they can come back to it as much as they need. And because they've been there before, they're familiar with it. But then each time they're looking for something different. So going back to the well, reusing, especially with lower level learners, is super important. Another lesson learned over the past year and a half, routine, 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 right? Especially when you're doing that online, you've got an online synchronous session to your classes so that your students, your adult learners, these are principles of adult learning, go back to that, the Chickering and Gaming or whatever their names are, but going back to that information, we know that adults crave that routine and agendas, and they need to know what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and why, right? What's the point? What's the purpose? What am I going to get out of it? So having that routine, super important, especially for our learners, but especially for virtual learning as well. Keeping a teacher presence, a social presence, a cognitive presence, also super, super important. Teacher presence, when you're online, I don't know if any of you have ever taken one of those MOOCs, those massive open online classes in the past when there's thousands of other students in there with you. You submit your answers in a forum, you participate in chat, you submit an assignment, and then you wait. You wait for the feedback from the teacher, for that virtual thumbs up, which you may never get. If you don't get it, sometimes you feel like you're just sending something into oblivion, into that big black space, and what's the point, right? Our classes, of course, are not MOOCs. They're much, much smaller. It is so important to have that presence in your classroom, encourage students to interact with each other, especially in discussion boards, but giving that virtual thumbs up, letting the students know, I see you, I see what you've done, and if you don't have time to give detailed feedback at that moment, let them know when that detailed feedback is coming. Again, the social presence, cognitive presence just has to do with how students interact with the material that you are presenting them with. Okay, so recognizing that I only have an hour, I might have to go a little bit quickly over some of these topics in here, but I certainly will do my best to give a well-rounded and unbiased opinion on both the Google and the avenue.ca features and affordances of their learning management system. And yeah, before I go further, I didn't mention that I'm also a Google certified instructor. So I've done my Google certification. I have been Google certified at level 2. So I've gone through the training. The training is free. If anybody's interested in becoming a Google certified educator, certainly worthwhile doing. I highly, highly recommend it. You get connected to resources and groups and people that are really, really valuable sources of information and keeps you in the know about things that are coming up, such as upgrades to things like Google Meet, which I'm using right now to record this particular presentation. But it really gives you a good way to understand what's happening in the field. So the training is free. The certification costs not a whole lot, but it certainly is worthwhile. So I've got the Google certification, and I've been with Learn IT to Teach, helping them out with avenue.ca and Moodle prior to that. So I do wear both hats. I do recognize and appreciate the value of both systems of program delivery. I will try to walk you through some of these features here, including things like the dashboard, navigation, embedding, finding and using resources, creating assignments, grades and feedback, collaboration, gamification, help and support. And these, like I said, these are standard features in many learning management systems, not just Google, not just avenue.ca, but Blackboard, Edmodo, Schoology, you name them. A lot of these learning management systems have features, have these kinds of features. And why do they matter? Like, what's the point? What's the purpose? And hopefully I'll be able to give you what I think, and then I can hear back from you as to what you think about these particular features and affordances. And I'm only going to just touch on this because I can imagine many of you have already come across this model for technology integration. It's been around for a while, pre-pandemic. It's called SAMR, and SAMR stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. It has to do with how you use technology in your teaching and in your classroom. And it gives you some kind of outline as to what it looks like. And I'm not going to go over all of it because I think many of us have seen this model before. I just want you to imagine, though, like, had this global pandemic occurred 25 years ago or 30 years ago, I'm dating myself here, how would we have reached our students? Obviously, there'd be quite a few technology differences, but what would we have done differently? I don't know. I mean, maybe a local cable TV, who knows? But what would we have done differently 25 years ago? And now, what are we doing today that has redefined how we deliver language lessons to our LINC students across the country? So think about that, and we'll come back to that at the end. So again, let's get into it. We're going to talk about the features and affordances of these two learning management systems. Now, before I go any further, just a quick note, and if Jim Edgar is listening to this later on when he's editing my video, some people don't really think that the Google Classroom is a true learning management system per se. It is a platform, of course, and it integrates all of the Google Apps for Education features and apps that are available. But is it truly a learning management system? Some argue no, and it's not, because it doesn't offer one key feature. What is that key feature? I'm going to get you to think about that, and I'm going to come back to that later on in the presentation. So when we talk about Google Classroom and avenue.ca or any learning management system, the one thing we need to look at is ease of use. This applies both to the teacher and for the students. How easy is it for our students to use it? And for the teacher, because it's the teacher who's going to be on the site creating assignments, giving feedback, organizing synchronous and asynchronous activities. So how easy is it for the teacher, for the student, for all users involved? How easy is it to join a class? Right? If this is overly complicated, then this can be frustrating for the teachers. Once you get the hang of it, of course, it becomes second nature. But when you're first starting, I know, because I've had instructors email me before, as I can't get my students on, what's going on, what's the problem? The other thing you need to look at is what's known as the interface, the user interface. And that is your landing page. Like when you enter, what does it look like? What does this system look like? What do you see? What do you not see? What is difficult to find? What is easy to find? So how easy is it for you to navigate your platform? And sometimes when there are a lot of blocks and places to go, students get lost or confused. So we'll talk about navigability in a moment. Do users know where to go, when to get assignments, contact their teacher, review their submissions, and grades? So the easier and the simpler this is, the more likely students are going to adapt it. Design, effective, efficient, engaging. Does it look nice? Is it accessible? Is there a student view? And a year and a half ago, if I asked this question, your response would be, so what? Why does that matter? Student view matters. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Accessibility features are so important, especially now going forward with our students that require accessibility features. You have to pay attention to the font, the color of the font, the size of the font, descriptive elements that come out on images, and things of that nature. Is that offered in your learning management system? And if not, maybe you might want to think about doing something else. So Google Classroom, very, very simple, very, very basic again. And that is the appeal of Google, is that it is laid out as simply and as easy to navigate as possible. Because again, obviously Google didn't want the teachers to be overly confused or the learners to be confused. My headset keeps falling off my head, sorry about that. When you log into your Google account, at the top of every Google account, there is a waffle. And that's actually not the technical term. The technical term is the application launcher. When you select the application launcher, it opens all of your Google apps. Classroom is in there. You select Classroom. It takes you to your Classroom landing page. Obviously, if you're not a student or teacher, nothing will be there. But if you are a teacher or a student, everything will be. The classes in which you are a teacher and the classes in which you are a student will all show up there. And you can see here, I am a student in the first class, the one that says 2017 Global Education. I know that because of the little tiny symbol at the bottom that has a person inside a little box that indicates classroom assignments. It's a shortcut just to see what I need to do. The class beside that, I can see I'm a teacher. Well, I've been invited to, I think I've been invited to teach. I'd have to see, I can't remember. And the classroom on the far right-hand corner, I am a teacher. And how I know that is because that little zigzaggy line there, and that zigzaggy line will get me directly to the grade book, which students don't have access to, but teachers do. So this is the landing page inside Google Classroom. It's laid out in tiles, and Google has been doing amazing in the past year and a half at being responsive to teachers' needs. In the past, you couldn't rearrange these. Today you can. So if you've got like my page had like about 12 of these classrooms on them, you can move them around and put the ones that you want at the top because it always displays in tile view. So you want to have the ones that you're most frequently accessing at the top instead of having to search through a list. You can reorder that now. You couldn't a year ago. And this is, oh, sorry, I should probably have showed you what Avenue dashboard looks like. I'll have to go back and fix that, but that's okay. So this is what happens when you are enrolling learners. So I'm just going to go back there for a second, see if I can go back. And that was the point of this, is that if I want to add students to a particular class, I can join a class by a code. So the teacher already has the class code, and all she needs to do is send that code in a message, text message, email to your students. And the student just needs to select on Google Classroom. And in that little drop-down box, it says Join Class. And if you select Join Class, it's going to offer you the option to enter a code. And that code will get you into the classroom. So that was a point of that slide, just to show you how easy it is in Google Classroom. Actually, that is one of the advantages of Google. Enrolling is super easy, except you got to have a Google account in order to get in. So whereas in avenue.ca, any email address will do. You don't have to have a specific domain or an account somewhere. But for Google Classroom, you must have a Google account. It makes sense because you're going to be using your apps. Enrolling users inside of avenue.ca, you can do it in a few ways. Inside my course, if I go and scroll down along the left-hand menu, this is actually not the easier way, but I'll show you how to do that. If you select participants, you are able to then select enroll users, and through that you can enter your student's email address, and if they are already associated with avenue.ca, they've already got an account. Perhaps they were with another teacher before. Then this learner will appear here, and you select them and you enroll the user, like so. Now, if the learner has not previously had an avenue.ca account, as we know, that process does take a little bit more time. You need to go back onto your course dashboard at avenue.ca, and in the course, if you see that at the bottom of your tile, there are 4 different options. The far right hand with the little rocket is going to launch your course. Now you don't want to do that yet. You want to go to Enroll New Student, and then it will give you these options to add the student and create the account. Now, again, this does take a little bit more time in avenue.ca, but once it's done, it's done. You got to put in that initial work, but it certainly is doable. Like it just takes a bit of time. The one important thing to remember is that when the student logs in for the first time, you're going to hand them over their password because the teacher's created the account. But the student has to make sure in their profile that they've got the correct CLB level specific courseware selected, or they're not going to see that information on their course. So just make sure that these instructions are very, very clear to your students and they have everything selected appropriately. And that's usually the reason why when students say, teacher, I can't see that activity that you're talking about, I don't understand where it is. Usually the reason is because they don't have the right courseware selected under their profile. And it looks a little bit like that. You go up into your profile by selecting on the image at the top or your initials at the top, drop down to edit profile, and you want to make sure you see all these boxes are deselected on the left. You want to make sure that they look like the one on the right and that they are all selected. And then you want to make sure that they hit update profile so that all this information is in the system and then they can access everything that they need to. And I mentioned student view. Why is it important that we have that we have access to student view? Well, let me ask you, has anybody had to use student view before and for what purpose? Probably the most common purpose is for giving instructions to your learners. If you are trying to help them with their navigation, where to go, how to submit an assignment, how to turn in an assignment, how to find something, I think we've become experts at grabbing screenshots. Now, it doesn't look the same from the teacher's point of view as the student's point of view. The teacher has all these other options and features and functions, as a teacher should, right? The teacher needs to have all these other things that are grayed out, etc. You don't want to have a screenshot that shows that because it's not the same for the student. They're going to get confused. Having student view helps the teacher understand the steps the student needs to take in order to do the thing they need to do. And that's probably the most important reason why we have it. In avenue.ca, very, very simple. Up in your profile, drop down, switch role to, and then it allows you to choose from a list of options, student being one of them. So when you select that, it will get rid of all that extraneous, distracting pieces that the students don't need to see, and you can see what the student sees. Take your screenshots if that's what you're doing. And Google doesn't have that. No student view in Google Classroom. That is one thing that has driven my teachers, the teachers on my staff, crazy over the past year, because it can be a little difficult explaining, especially to lower level students or students with little digital literacy skills, how to do certain things, not having their point of view for teachers. And the teachers are learning this too. So the teacher doesn't necessarily know that that which the teacher sees is not what the student sees. So the teacher doesn't always know that. So it has caused a lot of confusion for our staff over the past year. And if you're in an educational domain, you can't create a dummy account. You can create a dummy account if you're outside of an educational domain. And by dummy account means you just create a student account so you can go in there and look at what it looks like, and then take those screenshots if you need to. So in this case, we're in an educational domain. We can't do that. So it was very difficult. The only other walk around that we've had was that you could invite another teacher to go into your Google Classroom as a student, and then that teacher could take the screenshots for you and then give them to you. But that took time, and when you want something to be done right away, not the best option. So Avenue wins for this particular function and feature. Getting around. So this is still related to navigability and the interface. With Google Classroom, there is literally no customization other than the banner image. So yes, you can choose your banner image, you can personalize the banner image, but that's it. What you see is what you get. You have no option to add or remove blocks, to change the order of the blocks or the tabs. This is it. Stream, classwork, people, grades. And the stream page looks like this. You can change how the stream shows up, but essentially this is it. You don't have any other customization features. And for some teachers, this is great. This is exactly what they want. They want it to be simple. They don't want to have all these extra bells and whistles. They want it to be exactly how you see it here. Now, of course, one of the issues that comes up is on your landing page, you might have an announcement that you want students to always see. With Google Classroom, every time you make an announcement, it shows up chronologically. So the most recent information shows up first. So if at the beginning of your course you have this important information, every time you make a new announcement, it's going to bump it down. Now you can go in and move things around and move things up, but there's no option to pin something to the top. So it does get a little tedious for teachers that have that specific bit of information that they want to stay solid. It won't. And that option still does not exist inside Google Classroom. Customization limited. Inside of avenue.ca, and this is a similar feature as to Moodle, what we used to have prior to this. You certainly do have these features. You can add blocks, you can rearrange blocks, you can make things visible or invisible. You can rearrange the size and how they appear on the page. You can add an HTML block, add a Twitter feed, add the About Me feature of the teacher. You know, you can add a calendar on the side. But again, remember what I was saying about a little goes a long way. Don't add too much. Think about your learners and what they need from you on your page, the basic chunks, the stuff that you want them to see whenever they log in, and you want them to be able to access it without having to wonder where to go and what to click. You don't need bells and whistles. You just need a logic, good flow, and keep it simple. But you can customize what it looks like in this sense. As for like the coloring and things like that and fonts, no, you can't do that in avenue.ca, but you do have some choice as to what and how your information is displayed. So just a bit of a summary on navigation, and I won't necessarily have to read this all off, but inside Google Classroom, when we talk about enrolling students, enrolling learners, it is a little bit easier, to be honest, inside Google Classroom, but with the caveat and the specific caveat that learners they must have a Google account. That's not the case with avenue.ca. It does take a little bit more effort to enroll learners inside of avenue.ca, but once it's done, and you don't have to worry about that again. Customization features inside of Google, very, very limited. Avenue has much more you could do in ways that you can rearrange things. You can hide blocks, move blocks. There's student view inside Avenue, which does not happen inside of Google. So if you're on the fence, that's it. That's all I need to tell you. Switch to Avenue. It's going to be much easier for you in the long haul. Okay, so content integration. Now, this is one of those characteristics of a learning management system that looks at how you use materials that you already have inside your learning management system of choice. Because at this day and age, we all have our favorite go-to resources, e-resources, websites, docs, Word docs, whatever it is that you have. you've already got that, the thumb drive, which is now stored on your Dropbox or your, in your Google Drive, wherever it's stored. You've got information already. Now the question is, how can I integrate that which I already use into my learning management system? So for example, ESL library. Many of us have been using ESL library to tell our resources and things like that. Let's say you have an ESL library account, right? How can I connect that to my learning management system? Is there a way to do it so that it's easy for my students? Can we connect Google Drive? Can we connect other platforms? Embedding, what does that mean? Why is that important? Talk about that in just a moment. So by content integration, like I mentioned, it's things like Flipgrid and Quizlet and ESL library, docs or polls and Mentimeter, Twitter feeds, and things such as that. How can I take this online resource and put it seamlessly into my learning management system? Well, easier said than done for some. Within Google Classroom, it looks a little different. Avenue actually has a really good advantage, and I'll talk about that in just a moment here. This is a very, very common third-party resource. You might have seen it before. Anybody know what this one is? In the chat? Yes, Padlet. Padlet's been around for a few years. It is an amazing, quick, simple, easy forum kind of layout that students can use. I use it all the time. I still use it. Been using it for years. No need to reinvent the wheel. Padlet is a really, really good way to have that interaction, forum posts, and things of that nature. Inside Padlet, they have a direct connection to Google Classroom. That's an advantage. That's definitely a plus. So when you go into your Padlet and you select share, you can go directly to your Google Classroom. It will give you options and choices, choose the classroom, and then it will enter into your assignments page or your stream, however you've chosen. So it would look like this. Here's that Learn at Home classroom example. And as soon as I hit enter, it shows up as this little tiny thumbnail here. And that's it. That's what you get. And when you open it up, you leave the Google Classroom. You're gone. It redirects you into the Padlet. So it opens up another tab, and then the students have to follow that tab and then do the assignments. And then remember that they have to get back into the Google Classroom, right? That's problematic, and as much as possible, especially with lower level learners, you don't want them to leave the platform when they're engaged in the platform because they get distracted, they get lost, they get confused, and there's advertisers. They can't remember how to log out and how to get back. So it is best if whatever you're doing, you're able to house things directly in your learning management system. So while it's really great that all of these third-party apps, and then there's many of them, directly integrate with Google Classroom, so what? All right, it's just a thumbnail, right? In Avenue, you can directly embed most, not all, I mean, for the most part, you can directly embed the HTML code in this case. So in other words, you can put a better title on it than I did here, but you add a page and then you add the HTML code. And you can see here, you're not leaving Avenue. You're still in the Padlet. It's still in the courseware. It's embedded directly. Students aren't having to leave. They can just use it directly. They have the option, I think, to open it up if they want to expand it, but it is right there, and that's a really good feature. It looks nicer, it's better, and overall, it's a much better option than a thumbnail which redirects students off of your courseware. Core content management. So what can I say about content management other than if you're not in a Google domain for education, you're gonna run out of space. As you can see here in my personal Gmail account, I'm about 2 gigabytes away from being overloaded with space. And of course, you always have that option to buy additional storage. Now, this is the free Google account. Inside Google Apps for Education, if you're in a nonprofit, you're in an educational domain, Space is unlimited. You don't have to worry about that. So like I said, just depends on what it is that your organization is using. Is there enough space available for uploads? Does it allow for different types of files to be shared? Again, embedding, customization, and can we create personal learning pathways? This is what we mean when we talk about how we manage the content in our courseware. Now, there's a lot. I could talk about that for an hour on its own, for sure. I'll try to just touch on the main points here. Inside Avenue assignments, there is a maximum size, and that maximum size is 2 gigabytes. If your students are submitting things that are bigger than 2 gigabytes, then we might have a problem. That's not going to happen, though. I mean, I'll knock on wood. It will rarely happen. 2 gigabytes, for example, I was looking to see an example of what that means as far as size goes. 2 gigabytes allows for 600 high resolution images. Now, I can't think of any single assignment that's going to involve attaching 600 images. So I think we're good as far as upload size limits go in Avenue. We're fine as far as that goes. So I don't think that is an issue, and it's not an issue with Google either. So as far as size goes, we're good on both accounts. As for personal pathways, learner voice and choice, you might have noticed that when I showed you the Avenue site, there's these little boxes that indicate that something's been done or not. That is actually a really cool feature of avenue.ca. Students can kind of go back and check their progress. They can check the boxes. It shows up as completed. They've already done it. This is really useful for the students in keeping them on track. Doesn't exist in Google. You don't have that option to add that kind of tracking that, and we'll talk more about user analytics in a moment, but you just don't see that same thing. I think I can show you what I'm talking about here if I can go back for just a second. Yes, right here. So you can see the little boxes. When something's been completed or the student has opened it up, which is not always, I know it's an imperfect system for sure, but at least I can see just by sight, I've already got 2 of these assignments done. They've been checked, and I can go forward from there. Doesn't happen the same way inside of Google. It's just not something that they offer. Learner voice and choice, again, having the option for students to go through certain blocks of information and make choices. So if you have, reading assignments or listening, speaking, other types of interactions, and giving students options is really appealing to those adult learning principles that we learn in Chickering and Gamson and Thomas and Kehu. Students are more likely to be engaged in the online experience or the face-to-face experience when they have a voice and a choice. So offering that is certainly a good thing, and Avenue does that a little bit easier than Google Classroom does. Gamification. All right, can we gamify our learning management system? And so what? Why does it matter? I'll talk about that right now. Things like badges, competing, having games available during your online synchronous or asynchronous component. Let me just show you here. Okay, so gamification. Tracy Sitzman out of the University of Colorado in Denver actually did some studies on adult learners and different kinds of learning management sites, learning management systems. As we know, educational domains are not the only ones that use learning management systems. A lot of these exist in various businesses and nonprofit organizations and whatnot as training hubs for their staff. So Tracy Sitzman did a bit of a study through the University of Colorado at Denver, and she found that when you have gamification, skill-based knowledge increases by 14%, and also factual knowledge increases by 11%. And in addition to that, retention of material increases by 9%. Granted, these are relatively small percentages, but it's an increase, and it does indicate that maybe there is something to the quizzes and the games and the Kahoots. And, sometimes it's great to have that interaction and engagement in the class. But when you have games or when you take your information, you gamify it in some way, it does actually make a difference to your learners. Not a huge difference, but a big enough difference. And also within avenue.ca, you have the option to create a bit of an incentive program via badges. And Nancy Van Dorp is the badge queen. She could tell you all about that. And I'm sure there are videos here on Learn IT to Teach's YouTube site on using gamification and badges. But certainly she is more the expert on this than I am, but you have that option. I went in and I created a few just to play around with them to see how easy and intuitive it was to do. It's fairly simple and it's fairly straightforward. You can go ahead, create your own graphic, put your own information on it, and students get kind of like this shelf of badges that they collect. And it's almost like, I don't know, collecting Pokemons or something like that. They've gone through, they've done certain things, and they get a badge for that. So it's just something that is offered that Google doesn't. Content management, also, we're talking about things such as conferencing tools. So when you're doing that synchronous session, is there a built-in feature that allows for these synchronous sessions? And within avenue.ca, they are using Big Blue Button. Big Blue Button does the job. Big Blue Button is an open source conferencing software tool. We used to use this at Tesla, Ontario. If you remember, prior to Zoom, we did use these at the Big Blue Button. And now, of course, Zoom has taken over the world, so everybody uses Zoom. However, Zoom is not always free, and it's limited. The free version, actually, there is a free version. Sorry, I meant to say that, but you have to pay for it. But let me start over. There's a free version, but you're limited as to how much time you have in the free version. I think it's something like 35 to 40 minutes. So as you know, for our online classes, they can be a bit longer than that. And if you're going to use that free version, sometimes you have to go back in a few times. But anyway, we're not talking about Zoom here. This is Zoom. Zoom's awesome. Love Zoom. But within avenue.ca, we do have the option to use Big Blue Button. Big Blue Button, very straightforward conferencing platform, super simple to use. And but as we know, synchronous online learning, especially over the past year, you start up and you think, okay, we're going to have our first class. Everybody's going to log in. We're going to get to know each other. The cameras are going to be on, and it's going to look like this. It's just going to be a fantastic experience. And anybody know who this picture is? All right, bonus points for that. As we know from the past year, our synchronous session, whatever conferencing tool we use, whether it is Big Blue Button, Zoom, Meets, Teams, what have you, doesn't look like this. Usually it looks a little bit different, more like this. It's a little chaotic. And actually, there should be a few blank spaces in there for people not on camera. So getting used to using these online conferencing tools is something that we just need to do. And whether or not we're using Google Meet, which is what's available within the Google domain, Big Blue Button, which is available in Avenue, practice is key. Just getting used to the features, the functions, the share screen, the record, hands up, annotation tools, and things like that. Just practicing it and getting used to it. And over time, the important thing is that our students are connected and that they're there. Just like, social distancing isn't new to this franchise. Again, bonus points for anybody that knows what that's from. The whole point of having this synchronous online platforms is so that students can be connected. And as much as possible, the connection and engagement happens when cameras are on. And that's a whole other conversation about whether or not we can demand that that happens or not, and how does that impact the class. It's difficult to teach to a blank screen. It's difficult to teach to a grid of letters instead of faces. So as much as possible, you want your students to be on camera. And that's a conversation that you need to have with them if there's some reason why they can't. But it's offered in both, like I said, Google offers Google Meet, and Avenue offers Big Blue Button. But Zoom is better than both of them, in my opinion. So content integration, Avenue has, as you know, a large smorgasbord of activities, resources, e-activities, readings, videos, listenings, MP3s, and it's all targeted for the CLB level. It's PBLA aligned. Avenue.ca is, like I said, it was a smorgasbord, but it has a wealth of resources. And these resources are constantly being created. New ones are coming out. Some of the old ones might, if they're older, they might be replaced. But there certainly is so much in there already that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The teacher can go through and look to see what's the best tool for the learning objective, deselect it, make that an assignment, use that in your classroom, and there you go. There's no, rushing online, trying to find something that fits in this particular theme. If it's in there, if the theme is there, there's likely something that's going to fit your needs. So that said, obviously Google Classroom doesn't offer anything like this. And even all of these resources, for the most part, if they're H5Ps or SCORMs or things like that, you can't really extract that and use that outside of this platform. It's meant to be used on this platform. Tutela has a large amount of other teacher-created resources that you can download and use as well. So just for the CLB material, it certainly is useful from literacy up to CLB 7 and 8. Some really, really cool resources were just reviewed by Paul Carter and his partner last week, and super, super useful. I think it was CLB 7, 8, having to do with online or workplace meetings or something similar to that. You can certainly go through and get that courseware added to your Avenue dashboard. And there is also you can go into your dashboard and look along the side menu, look to see PBLA resources, the things that are new. If you find something that you like, you can ask your mentor to add that to your courseware, and that certainly can be accommodated. So again, a very, very useful feature and affordance of avenue.ca is the connection to the resources that are available. So again, as far as content integration and content management, Google, as we know, has a huge number of third-party apps that directly connect to Google Classroom, but they don't embed. It's just a thumbnail. It takes you out of the site in order to use them. Other Google apps can also be used, but again, they don't embed. You have to leave in order to access them. So Avenue has this direct embedding. Pages can be created, HTML blocks can be used to create like a Twitter feed, CLB, PBLA resources are provided. Probably one of the greatest features of avenue.ca is this access to resources that's available to all instructors and their learners. Other things that we need to consider with online learning, things such as mobile learning optimization. Now, a few years ago, this was a topic for conversation, but today it's a given. Especially in the past year and a half, we know our learners are accessing our courseware on their phones. We know this because they sometimes they can't see a button or they can't see something, and it's because maybe they just the layout looks a little bit different on their phone. So this is one thing that we as teachers have become very aware of, is how much our learners are online with their phone. So wherever possible, whatever resources we give, making sure that the resources are mobile friendly is super important. And things like that, having a writing assignment done completely on a smartphone, is a bit of a challenge. Yeah, the average person looks at their smartphones roughly 92 to 150 times per day. And these facts are pre-COVID. You can only imagine what those stats are today. The other important consideration is this one here, user analytics. Now, remember back at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that Google Classroom was not considered a true learning management system, and I asked you to think about why. Well, the answer has to do with this, user analytics. Google doesn't provide it, or at least it doesn't provide it in the way that other learning management systems do, like Avenue, like Blackboard, like Canvas. you can go into the user reports, outline reports or complete reports, and you can see where your learners have been inside your courseware. Now, this gives you a bit of an insight as to how your learners are using the resources. Now, it's not perfect. User analytics aren't. All they do is they give a bit of a glimpse. They certainly don't tell you when learners, for example, download a PDF and then spend an hour looking at it, right? They just see that, you've seen it for, 2 seconds, and then, you're on to something else. But certainly user analytics can show you how many times a learner has attempted a particular activity, maybe where they're struggling. So certainly they can be used to help with learners who are struggling. And this just tells you a little bit more about what learner analytics are in some of the more advanced learning management systems. And I've seen a few at some like the ISTEs and the other educational technology conferences. There are some amazing packages out there that use something called predictive analysis. And what this does is it has these algorithms that look to see where learners are struggling, and then it identifies activities that will help improve these so-called weaknesses. This is, the stuff of the future. We're not there yet, quite yet, with avenue.ca, but at least we have the analytics in place, so we can start looking to see perhaps where our students are spending the most time, and even time of day. When I looked in my user analytics for one of my courses, it really surprised me to see my students were accessing course material at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and that did give me some insight as to where they fit the courseware and the homework into their lives, because that's the only time they have maybe access to a computer, or the kids are sleeping, or things like that. Collaboration. Can we collaborate? Is there a feature function inside your courseware, whether it be Google or Avenue, that allows for collaboration? Threaded discussions, forums, that exists inside of avenue.ca, does not exist inside of Google. But not threaded discussions in any way. But there are things that you can do inside Google Classroom. You can pose a question. Students can ask questions about assignments, but you can't quite get a discussion forum in the same way that you can inside of avenue.ca. And I'm just going to touch on this really briefly because I know I'll be running short on time. So the other important consideration in any learning management system has to do with assessments, assignments, and testing. I think I should rename that to assignments and testing. Just things like, can we create and upload quizzes? Can we do that directly in the site? Grade books, mark books, tracking attempts and how much time it took on the attempts. Is there a minimum score that can be required before attempting the next block or unit? And is there a mechanism for feedback on the assessment tool? And I'll show you a few examples here. Inside of Google Classroom, this is what their grades page looks like. I can open up grades and click on the user and then get the user's report, or I can click on the assignment and get all the assignments all in one page. So it's laid out really, really simply, easy to see, view submissions, enter the mark. It is super simple to use. Just the grading and the grading features. And it's very similar to the kinds of annotation tools that we have in avenue.ca, although avenue.ca actually has a few better tools that you can use to annotate. But Google does have something very similar. When you're editing, it shows up in suggestion mode, and suggestion mode means if I were to make some corrections directly on the page, it'll show up as green and the lines will be through it and things like that. Which can be a little bit confusing, but you certainly have that option. And if you scroll down, there's comments and things like that. You don't have an option to add a direct voice feedback like you do in avenue.ca, although you could upload a voice tool or get, I think there is a Chrome extension that will let you do that now, but I can't think of the name of it offhand. And the other thing I want to say about Google Grades and assignments and things of that nature, is that Google's got some great features, such as create a copy for each student. This allows the teacher inside of a Google Classroom to create the assignments, and maybe it's a Google Doc where they want the student to answer something or write something in boxes or things like that. The teacher can select make a copy for each student, and then each student gets a copy. The only problem with that has been it's a bit confusing for students and for the instructors, because some students will try to attach something to the assignment, but they don't need to because the assignment's already been created, but they don't know to look for that. And sometimes that button, the turn in button, doesn't appear in the same place if they're on their mobile device. And sometimes when the teacher's actually trying to create the assignment, if it's originally in Word, it has to be converted to Google Doc. And now that's easily enough done. You drop down under File, Save as Google Doc. However, when you go to create the assignment back in Google Classroom, the Google Doc icon and the Microsoft Word icon are virtually indistinguishable, right? They're the same color of blue, and they got white on it. So the W for the Word and the 3 lines across for the Google Doc. So even though the teacher may have converted to Google Docs from the Word, she might actually upload the wrong file into her assignment. And then it can't be created as make a copy for each. The student has to then download it, save it, and then upload it again to the assignment when they turn it in. So this has been a never-ending struggle for the past year, and it's definitely something that has not been intuitive, has not been easy to use. So even though I commend Google for that feature, make a copy for each, unless the teacher and the students are familiar with that structure, it's going to be problematic. The other thing that's a problem inside Google with assignments is that the student is the owner. And when they submit an assignment, they have the option to unsubmit. So they've done a real world assessment task, they've submitted it, then they've gone back, they think about it, they say, oops, I should have done this, I should have done that. They can actually go in, unsubmit it, change it, and then resubmit it. Of course, the teacher sees that, they've done this if they're paying attention to their inbox, but when your inbox has 5,000 messages in it, you might miss one or two, so you might not notice that. So that can be a bit of a problem, and there's no way to disable that feature. So that is a bit of a problem if we're talking about reliability and validity of assignments. So that's one of the issues. Inside of avenue.ca, and again, I'm looking at the time and I'm not going to have a whole lot of time to go into many details about this. Going into your assignments, to open up the assignments, you can see who's submitted what and view all submissions. The editing features are a little bit better than what Google offers. There are, different annotation features. There's little sticky notes. The grade feature is right there. You can access the students by just scrolling over to next user. And all of the information, the breadcrumbs, are at the very top of the page. So it's laid out really simply, and I really like this feature of avenue.ca. You can see this is what it looks like as a whole. You can see the information here. I think there's even an option if you scroll down. I didn't quite catch it on here, but you can add a voice recording to it as well. A poodle is what they're known as here, but you can certainly add voice feedback to an assignment directly in the assignment itself. So it's a really useful feature inside of avenue.ca. And again, here's a basic summary of the two for grades, assignments, and feedback. Now, I'm not going to read through everything because I've just gone through it all, but certainly you can go back and look at this later on if you like. Help and support. And for this, again, if you have the choice of a learning management system, help and support is something you should consider. Now, as we know, Google is a giant. Google has got massive helps and support sites, Facebook groups, but you can't always get the answers you want when you need them. Avenue.ca, different story. Avenue.ca has support all over the place. You have got Avenue.ca, you've got training, the training materials. You've got numbers of training documents. You can go to the Avenue website and look specifically for certain issues you're having. If you're having problems with assignments, they have tons of videos and documents. In addition, you have access to mentors and trainers who can help you out. And you also have live access. Well, depending on the time of day, you can scroll down to the bottom, and if the green button says, hey, we're live, ask a question, they're very, very good at responding and helping you find the information you need when you need it. So the training, the support, the development of the avenue.ca team is just amazing. There's also a teacher-only forum. Inside the teacher-only forum, you can scroll through and look for things that other teachers have had problems with. Now, if you're having an issue with something such as enrolling users, you can bet this has come up before, and you can probably do a search and find the information you're looking for directly from the teacher-only forum. So again, multiple sources of information, amazing resources and support staff. The team of mentors at Learn IT to Teach is just amazing. I learn from them all the time. Shameless plug, I guess, but they are certainly a really approachable group of people. Google, again, like I said, you can go in and you can find questions. I'm part of Google groups and Facebook groups, and that's one way that I stay connected. I stay connected on Twitter as well, but I find that avenue.ca just has a better and more relevant support system for me. Security, obviously you want your site to be secure, and both sites are. So, and I don't have a whole lot to say about that, but just brings me back to the end of the presentation. So, looking at Google as a platform of choice versus Avenue, both of them have useful features. Many organizations and providers went to Google when the pandemic broke out because it was just assumed it would be easier. And in some cases, it is. It was, especially with enrolling students. But having access to these resources, having access to the support system, and embedding features and customization features that are available inside Avenue, really, for me, seals the deal. Looking at all these features and understanding, why are these important, is well, here's a bit of a comparison at the end. Just my own opinion on Google Classroom and Avenue Learn IT to Teach. I kind of did a little bit of a grading system here. When I look at ease of use, and I give a grade and I explain why, and I'll leave this information for you to look at, and I'll take this time to answer questions that you might have. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending my workshop today. And if you do have any questions, you can get a hold of me through Avenue's online teachers only forum or through Twitter at Jen Artan, and I will certainly get back to you as soon as I can. Again, thank you very much for coming out to the presentation and for viewing this, and have a great day. And just trying to stop recording here. There we go.